Hi, Tom.
Hello, Jace. Nice to see you, mate. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 10 by 6. This week, we're going to look at something that I've been concerned about for a long time, but it really stoked my imagination this week, Tom. I don't know if you saw it, but it was a story that was in the corporate media about a lady in her 60s. I think she was 61, and she'd basically been dead for 2 years. And the neighbours had pointed out to the landlord that over the 2-year period that there'd been a nasty smell emanating from her apartment, her flat. But nobody had thought, even obviously the landlords didn't respond, but nobody had thought to contact the emergency services. Nobody had thought to try and break into the property. You know, they just talked amongst themselves and said, oh, you know, occasionally, oh, have you seen? And as I say, there was this smell emanating from it. So you'd have thought that would have been a pretty good giveaway. And it got me thinking about, you know, the erosion of community, Tom, and how over the last 3-4 decades, we have moved from something that's been quite collective, not perfect in any way whatsoever, but quite a sort of a collective spirit. And we've moved away from that, and we've become a lot more privatized in our existence. And I just wanted to maybe just, you know, to focus and analyze some of the reasons and some of the consequences of that. And you know, and invite viewers to put messages underneath the video when we publish it, and to discuss it amongst themselves. You know, what can we do to stop this erosion? What can we do to have a much more of a collective identity and come back together and support each other? But of course, there are many, many obstacles that are put in our way, as we know. And one of the things that I've sort of conclusions that I've reached is that it's driven by economics. It's driven very much by that infrastructure that society is built on, that platform, that society is built on, that determines the way in which we exist. So the politics and the culture come out of that. So if you just give one example, you know, if, for example, we decide that it's not cost effective for every street, shall we say, to have a post office, then what we are therefore doing is we're taking away the opportunity for people to come together socially. It's not just about you go into a post office and you buy your stamps or you hand your parcel over. A lot of it was about collecting your pension. So on a Thursday morning, you'd have a whole long line of people who've pensionable age, and they pretty much come at the same time. It become part of, you know, the pattern, you know, 10:30 possibly, you know, that's the time I'm going to go, or 9 o'clock or whatever. And the same types of people be around you, and you talk with those people about other people. And somebody would say, you know, I haven't seen Beryl this week, have you? And somebody else in the line would say, look, I'm passing her house on the way home. I'll look on the door, and then, you know, I'll let you know if what I find out. But that's collapsed. It's gone. And it's not just obviously post offices. It's the closures of hospitals and A&E departments.
Libraries.
It's the closure of libraries and all these different places that used to thrive within communities where people...
Elderly daycare centres, Jace.
Elderly daycare centres, absolutely. All those places where different demographics, different age groups, different people used to come together regularly and mix, as humans are supposed to do. And it's now being replaced, as I say, by balance sheets. It's being replaced by iPhones. It's being replaced by game stations. It's being replaced by, you know, multiple channels on our televisions, etc., etc. So, I mean, how do you feel about it, Tom?
I agree with you. It's the loss of community, the loss of collectivism, as it's known, is to be lamented. The effects of it are stark in our society, and altogether they represent a very successful 40-plus year attempt by the ruling class to divide and rule and ensure that we don't take collective action to change the way society is run, which is all in their favour, and for the benefit of a small percentage of incredibly wealthy and powerful people. And all of that, it's been a 40-plus year campaign. I wrote about some of this in an article on Dorset Eye. If people haven't seen it, do look it up. Just over a year ago, when Trump left office and My Way, the song My Way was played on the speakers as the plane took off from Washington, carrying him away from Washington. And of course, favourite song, he played it as his inauguration as well. But the song itself, of course, can be viewed as a very selfish and narcissistic song. And so I explored that a bit, and I explored how community has been taken away from us quite deliberately over a period of time, and starting in this country, certainly, you could really see that starting in the Thatcher years. And Thatcher said, famously, there is no such thing as society. And that signaled a shift from collectivism and community towards individualism and also greed, individualism and greed, acting in your own self-interest rather than in the interests of others or a collective whole. I talked in the article about how when I was a kid, we had low garden fences either side of our garden for 5 or 6 gardens. So you could see across the neighbours' gardens for, about a dozen gardens. So we got to know each other, and our kids would play in each other's gardens and houses and so forth. Nowadays, it's a selling point to properties that your garden is not overlooked and there's giant fences, so you don't ever get to see your neighbours. You're not ever bothered by them, or they don't get to see you. You don't get to see them. That's regarded as a selling point. And if people buy a house these days with low garden fences, they stick up great big fences. It's very sad. And I actually gave the example in the article a year ago of when I was a kid, there was an old lady who lived 2 doors down, and if the weather was bad, Mum would say go and see her and see if she needs any shopping. If her milk was not taken in from the doorstep, then we'd knock and see if she was okay. Nowadays, of course, those things don't happen. Nowadays, as I said in the article, we hear of people that have died months ago, and nobody knows. Nobody even knows they're dead. That's a very sad state for us to be in. There's a couple of other things that have happened as part of this shift away from collectivism, which is
Can I just say something about the about the fences? I think one of the things we also need to recognise is that years ago, people stayed in their houses for a lot longer. So you grew up and you knew your neighbours. For example, the house that we live in, we're only the 3rd owners since it was built in 1900. And yet now there's far too many houses that are owned by landlords, and the turnover of people in and out of those houses is sometimes huge. Yeah. So it's no longer the fact that you can put out your washing on a Tuesday, as things used to happen before, and you look down and you can see everybody's washing lines. Yeah. Now it's a completely different society in which we live in, which the turnover of neighbours in itself is so great. You never actually get an opportunity to necessarily form relationships with them.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a very important point. Yeah, we move around so much more and don't forge links in our communities and with our neighbours like we used to. Absolutely, Jace. There's also been, that period of 40 to 50 years has seen a massive reduction in union membership. We've gone from a society with 70+% of people, workers in a union, to 20-something % of people in a union, from roughly 3/4 to roughly 1/4 of our working population being a member of a union. And also that raises the question of, do we take collective action to fight for the rights of others? Which is part of also union membership, is you fight for the terms and conditions and rights of other workers. That's kind of been demolished. And generally, do we fight for the rights of others, for people that are oppressed and disenfranchised in our society? How willing are we now to step up, stand up for rights of other people, which I think is one of the greatest things about our society when we've done it. But now, arguably, that's somewhat rare. So all of these things, all of these changes towards individualism favours, of course, the rich and powerful, the ruling class, because it means we're far less likely to fight to join a union and get better terms and conditions rather than be exploited. We're far less likely to fight for the rights of others so they can trample on whoever they wish at will. And we're far less likely to want to change the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important before we finish off that we don't just blame privatization and rationalization and the way in which everything now has a price tag. I think it's also important to remember that the loss of God is also important, because I think when people generally believed that there was a God and that they would be rewarded for living, let's say, according to the scriptures, they would be rewarded for eternity. As Nietzsche pointed out at the end of the 19th century, that just because God is dead, so to speak, as he called it, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, but just because God is dead, humans will always find something to replace God. They're always applying, and whatever replaces God, they'll find something to replace that. And at the moment, what we have to replace God is materialism. So we are obsessed with things. We are vain. We are competing all the time with people around us in terms of what we have and what we don't have, what we should have. And I'm using that as a generalization. I'm not suggesting that every single person lives like that. But what I'm suggesting is that it's part of a culture. Yeah. And it's undermining the nature of community, because instead of us looking at other people as being friends and people we can lean on, who can lean on us when the time is appropriate, that's gone. It's not so much gone. It's just been dramatically eroded by this idea now that we got a bigger TV than them, or we got a furniture from a different store than them, or whatever. And that is ultimately is really, really sad for the human psychology.
Yeah, and economically and culturally, life has become more like one big competition rather than any sort of community where we seek to look after each other and nurture each other. It's more competitive now, and that's in the interest of capitalism. It's in the interests of the wealthy. That is the capitalist system. It's run as one giant competition, in which there are a tiny number of massive winners and a vast number of major losers. Us.
And to the very last point, I think, interestingly, we're not the only ones to think this, because multiple polls have been done globally, from Canada, the UK, South America, the US, and many other countries. And interestingly, a very, very significant number of people blame capitalism. Mm-hmm. It's not just this idea that there's this radical group of left-wingers who perceive the problems of our existence to be primarily about capitalism. Actually, poll after poll after poll in the mainstream, people are starting to say the same things. They're starting to recognize it for themselves, and they probably would never see themselves as being, on the left or radically left, or whatever label is thrown at them.
Oh, absolutely. And we must also mention, you know, the happiness index and mental health problems. You know, people in, you know, capitalist nations increasingly unhappy and suffering mental health problems, and perhaps arguably more willing to kill each other as well, especially in places like America. The Children's Society do, I think it's annual or biannual study of young people in this country, children and young people, and it's called A Good Childhood, and they release that report, and it's used by governments even. But you know, ever since they started doing it, they recognise the forces of capitalism, essentially, the competitive nature of our society, and materialism and consumerism as the biggest sources of young people's unhappiness and problems. And so, yes, you know, for people of all ages, certainly, you know, if we want to think about our young people, certainly for them, this materialistic and competitive environment is harmful.
Yes. And I think final message needs to be, folks, we all need to start knocking on our, you know, neighbours' doors. We need to be introducing ourselves. We need to be asking if there's anything that we can do. And, you know, people who are struggling and around us, doesn't have to be, you know, same terrace or whatever, in a different place. We need to start feeling more able to open up to them and basically say, look, if we can help and support you, you need to trust us. We won't overstep the boundaries, but, you know, please don't feel that if you're struggling, you're on your own. Because, as you said, mental health issues, suicide, stuff like that, it's just, it's so normalized now, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Tom. You take care.
Okay, take care to you, Jason. Everyone out there, look after yourselves. And what was it Jerry Springer said? Look after yourselves and each other.
Yes, definitely, definitely. Take care. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.